All right, what is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. Thanks for joining me and my pal Bill Scurry for today's live stream about Michael Keaton and his unique interpretation of the character of Batman. We're going to be talking about his two films with Tim Burton, as well as his upcoming appearance in The Flash. And because of early screenings, there's already a full synopsis out there, so be careful about what you see online. But for the first 15 minutes, I can promise absolutely no spoilers of any kind on this live stream. And before we go into any rumors or announcements or whatever, we will give you a big fat juicy warning. But after we ranted and raved a bit about Batman and Batman Returns, we're going to open up the live stream to any and all questions. So probably going to go for about an hour, unless y'all are just going berserk, and then we'll obviously hang in and shoot the shit with y'all. But with all that out of the way, Mr. Scurry, thanks for joining me. Let's dive right in with my first question. I always think of Batman as three roles. You've got the Bat, you've got Bruce Wayne's public persona, and you've got Bruce Wayne in private, which only a few characters like Alfred ever get to see. But for me, Michael Keaton's public version of Bruce Wayne is my favorite by any actor from any era, and I think that's what really sets his interpretation apart from some of his peers. But for you, what it is about Michael Keaton's approach to the character that remains unique after all these decades?
Well, Keaton, people, if you're our age, if you're at the terrible age that we're at, you will remember the firestorm involved with his casting. And a lot of it had to come in right off the fact that Keaton had worked with Tim Burton on Beetlejuice right before he did Batman. And so the tumult and the uproar was based on this idea that they had a comedic actor, a physical slapstick Robin Williams type actor, with, as some of the letters went, a high hairline, no chin, and no build of any sort, and also a fairly short man, playing Batman. He was going to essentially plunge the role back into camp chaos, which is where the Bill Dozier show, it had living in that kind of ridiculousness, with the exceptions of the Challenge of the Super Friend cartoons in the 70s and 80s. But the thing is that, people obviously weren't giving Keaton enough credit because he had done a bunch of really good dramatic movies like Clean and Sober. He really was trying to stretch. In fact, the casting director, Marion Doherty, who cast Batman, was the same one who cast him for Clean and Sober. And so she knew exactly what he could do. I think it was producer John Peters and Tim Burton were the guys who were both true believers for Burton. They're the ones that said, this is the guy we want because it's exactly the guy you don't expect. You talk about the other guys who played Batman and the other jobs they did at those roles. You think about Clooney, maybe had the best chin, but he was the worst Batman. That's no reflection on Clooney. It's just because he didn't get it right. He wasn't able to encapsulate those three things. But Keaton in particular had a form of acting that it was natural. It was very sort of 1980s layered from that school of acting. The guy started as a stand-up comedian. I mean, you listen to his Mark Maron episodes that he did. He would hang out on the line at Catch a Rising Star. He came up through the trenches with these guys. Like, he was a real, honest to God, waiting for stage time stand-up comedy. He knew how to tell a joke. He knew how to, where to sit in front of the camera, where to catch his light. He knew about timing. He knew about all these things. So he had a big toolkit, this guy. And I think that for exactly all the reasons that people didn't think he was going to be a good Batman is precisely the reason why he looked amazing in that first trailer. Did you remember seeing that in the theater?
I remember seeing the trailer. I mean, I was 12 when I caught the trailer. The movie came out right around the time I turned 13. And I knew Michael Keaton from Mr. Mom, and I knew him from Beetlejuice, but I don't even know if I was even aware that the guy in Beetlejuice was the same guy as, like, from Mr. Mom. I was in a point in my life where I wasn't following movie news or casting announcements. Like, it was the fucking 1980s. And I was living in Greensboro, North Carolina, with the idea of like having any input or pushback to anything going on in Hollywood. It would be like objecting to like weather patterns on Mars, which is a completely separate universe in a pre-internet age. And so I was just kind of one of those guys where I was curious and I was excited, but I was still reading my Batman comics and that sort of thing. But I by no means was even like, I think I was maybe vaguely aware that there was some pushback way up on the fringes, but otherwise I just did not give a fuck.
That first trailer, people were waiting to see what it was going to be like, because before that, you only had a couple of like New York Times articles. I went back and I read some of these in the archive, and they were very good at completely locking down Pinewood Studios to make sure not a single shred of evidence left. There was no photography, there was no story, no head of the plot, nothing, no hint of anything. And so the first time you saw this, essentially, look on YouTube, it's there. It's under Batman Rare trailer, original trailer. It's there.
Oh, I've seen it. Yeah. No, I remember when I first saw it in the theater, and he's like, when he just says Bruce Wayne, in that instant, He was Bruce Wayne. There was no kind of like growing pain for me whatsoever.
No. Yeah. So Michael Keaton was able to give you that kind of fidgety, psychotic energy a little bit, but everything's boiling under the skin. People are saying in the chat about how the eyes, is sort of what you need. You get the eyes that are painted in black. I think he's got an incredibly strong lip, I know he's doing a little bit of a pout, but you think about what you see.
He has many female admirers who like his lips quite a bit.
Yeah, that's amazing. But it's, I understand, like with Peter Weller had to figure out how to use the Batman, the RoboCop suit in 1987. He had to figure out how to use it, right? So he wasn't just swallowed up in it. He didn't die inside the goddamn thing. And the same thing with Keaton, had to figure out how to use those Bob Ringwood costumes, because he would get swallowed up with it too, quite literally sweating himself to death inside of it. But I mean, it added bulk, to him. It made him seem like a larger man because he has a slight build, but he's kind of an all-American dude. He's from I think he's from the suburbs of Pittsburgh. He sort of grew up in the country, doing actual rough and tumble stuff. And now he lives on a ranch in Montana. And he's a very physical dude. And so, what you might have thought as being a very city-bound stand-up comedian, slapstick, antic energy was completely subverted by the way he played Bruce Wayne. Like you said, at that first scene, when you meet him and Vicki Vale's going through, at the party, he does such, really, really reined in slight things. You see that
he's almost like an absent-minded professor. And I like how Alfred's always picking things up behind him. It's like places the glass down and it falls, or he's sticking pins and things. But I like the fact he's a little crazy, a little distracted. Contrast that with like Christian Bale, who's doing like the full Patrick Bateman mode in Batman Begins. I like the fact that Bruce Wayne is an eccentric, and of course he'd be an eccentric in private and in public. And I just find that kind of that weird, distracted style that he had really interesting. And then of course, when we see him in private in the Batcave and that sort of thing, he's dialed in, he's focused, he's intense, he's a completely different person. And so, yeah, that's why his performance has aged extremely well for me. And I revisited both movies ahead of this recording, and I was just blown away all over again. I mean, I've seen Batman. I've been watching at this point for 33 years of my life on repeat, and I still get goddamn goosebumps. Whether it's the scene where he brings Vicki back to the cave and the music's swelling, or it's the camera pans up at the end and you see the bat sign up in the air, or the bat signal up in the air. Once again, goosebumps the size of grapefruits, up and down my arms. And it just shows like, yeah, I think this performance is going to age like wine.
One of the things is, you mentioned the scene where Vicki Vale goes in the Batcave. When he's distracted because he's watching Jack Napier on the monitor, and then Alfred and her come in. He does this spin in the chair. It's almost like this bashfulness, like he was caught with his dick out. And it's just like, it quite literally is. He just was seen the most naked of anything. And even though it's her, it's this sort of like, he's got to calibrate really quickly, but I just love how natural he is about it. He reacts in such a visceral way that this guy who's so used to, if it's performing a version of Bruce Wayne, it's certainly keeping the whole Batcave thing, and the fact that when he's sitting at that giant bank of computers in front of him, maybe there's no place else in this huge mansion he ever feels as comfortable there. The scene where he's having dinner with Vicki Vale, he says, I don't think I've ever been in this room before.
And he sells it. He really makes you believe it.
Right. But the thing is, he's kind of joking at the same time. He's kind of not joking, because actually, and then he says, some of this house is not me, but some of it is very much me. He's referring to the Batcave as very much him. The rest of it is Thomas and Martha Wayne's collection of stuff that he just walks around and makes sure is dust free.
Yeah, but king of the Wicker people and that sort of thing.
King of the Wicker people. What he says to Vicki Vale, she says, "Can you tell me which one of these guys is Bruce Wayne?" He says, "I'm not sure." And again, it's like it's a line reading with like two meanings, because the truth is, he is not sure. He says to Michelle Pfeiffer, the both of us have been split down the middle. Like we're the same. We were split down the middle. And for the two Burton movies, those themes are continually hammered on. And the thing is, whatever the differences in style between Batman and Batman Returns, I think that Keaton does a great job of smoothing over and making even though it's the same director, I feel like it's two slightly different performances based on the confidence of the filmmaking team. But, Keaton is a constant from the first moment when he's beating up Christopher Fairbanks on the roof, I'm Batman. And then till the very end, where he's looking for Selena Kyle inside the Penguin cave.
And that's still the best line reading of "I'm Batman" of any actor in movie and or TV or animation history. No one said it better than that scene.
It's the first one. Isn't it hilarious, by the way, that guy now, Christopher Fairbanks, is in the Guardians of the Galaxy's movie? Like, he just showed up. He's one of the aliens. He was at nowhere at the last poker game. I like the fact that guy has endured for 30 years too. That's a nice bit of character actor bona fides on the part of that dude.
All right. Well, since you bring up contemporary superhero flicks, my next question for you is, when we were kids, and you and I are the same age, when this flick came out, all we had was some animation and we had Christopher Reeve's Superman to compare to. And so when Batman came out in 89, I mean, it was unlike anything that the culture, I mean, it was a cultural hand grenade. It was the fastest movie to get to 100 million in US history. It was a genuine phenomenon. But now we've had many decades of superhero flicks. Many of them are pretty goddamn good, from like weird, kind of off the beaten track, subversive ones like Kick-Ass to big giant extravaganzas like Endgame. Do you still include Burton's double feature in the pantheon of all-time great superhero flicks?
Yeah, I do, and I put it ahead of most of them. I mean, as I really appreciate what Donner did with Superman 1 and 2. And I can see that there's a template for a type of superhero movie, but Superman by Donner to me is more of the Spielberg type 70s mold of wonder and awe, and it's less the modern blockbuster era. And also because it's, we're not just alluding to this, we're saying it outright that Batman 89 created the modern blockbuster the way we know it today. It was the handoff from 75 Jaws, 77 Star Wars, and I think the next pickup is 89 Burton Batman.
And just to interject, during that time, I didn't know this, theater ticket sales were in a massive state of decline. By the time Batman Returns came out, ticket sales were at a 15-year low. So we had this steady kind of like just dying on the vine since the blockbuster era of the late 70s, which I found to be fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, well, Return of the Jedi was 1983. That was like a gigantic world beater, and that was Lucas being distributed by 20th Century Fox. I'm trying to think of, I mean, between that time, you had two Superman movies came out. You had Superman 3 with Richard Pryor. You had Superman 4 by Cannon. And other than that, it was kind of moribund. You really didn't have much in this. And the blockbuster genre, the way we know it now, is based on these huge, costume burlesques. And it really didn't exist. It was a moribund idiom at the time. And people weren't taking Superman seriously because Cannon drove it into the ground. They bought it off for the Sulkins, and they decided to make their own movie that was a half-assed, kind of disaster. I'm sure it's got its defenders, but I'm not one of them. So, what was riding on 89 was all this stuff. I mean, it was just a ballsy guess by John Peters, Peter Guber, Melniker, Uslan, the two guys who were just pretty much in name only producers of Batman, but really Burton, Peters, Nicholson. I think Nicholson signing on the line really made it possible. And talk about, this is sort of absent to the discussion, but Nicholson taking his back end deal off of gross, not net, was also incredibly wise. Nicholson hasn't had to work a day in his life after he got payday. But that's essentially the thing that made this work. Anyone else was going to come on board. All these other actors that might have, like Billy D. Williams, you get. Kim Basinger wasn't the biggest A-lister in the world, but you get anybody you want after Nicholson.
You get Jack Palance, you get all kinds of cool people.
Yeah, exactly. So these two movies. I mean, the movie. There's no way for me to talk about Batman Returns, as excellent as it is, and I'm going to get. It's a 4-star movie for me. I'd say the Penguin and some of that stuff is kind of. I was talking before the mic went hot about how that stuff kind of loses me. The circus stuff kind of loses me a little bit. But I mean, and it was a disappointment just because it wasn't Batman 89. Again, it was a different movie, but it's an excellent movie. But yeah,
I look at Batman Returns. I like to say that the highs of Batman Returns are as deliriously high as any superhero movie I can think of. All the kinky, leathery, kind of like just like sex shit with Catwoman. It's some of my all-time favorite stuff I've seen in any era. The stuff with Penguin and the music and his gang is all aged like fucking vinegar for me. But I like uneven, kind of broken movies that have incredibly good scenes and incredibly lame scenes. So I love Batman Returns, but by the end, does anybody even give a shit what's happening at that point? Like, it's just the whole movie kind of falls to pieces, but it's a glorious mess. And I'll take Batman Returns over the great majority of most movies that come out today. But we have a super chat that I want to address from Mr. Joshua Gray. Thanks for the great videos, especially around Succession. Let's collaborate around the Flash release. Done and done. I'll gladly collaborate anytime. I'm looking to do a lot more live streams on this channel. So you tell me, your place or mine, and we'll go from there. But thank you so much for the donation. It is greatly appreciated. But let me give you one more question before we start getting into any sort of spoiler terrain. And this is kind of going back to the whole idea of like Batman Returns being a little kinkier. But we've seen many versions of Batman over the decades. But when it comes to Michael Keaton, it is safe to say, to borrow a line from Silicon Valley, this guy fucks. And if you were in his shoes, To whom does your heart truly belong? Vicki Vale or Selena Kyle?
Wow, look, having just finished watching Batman Returns like 12 hours ago, it's not even a contest. And again, this isn't to take away anything from Kim Basinger, but Kim Basinger
But you're a news buff, a journalism buff. I'm surprised that Vicki Vale doesn't like touch some part of your heart that leans that way.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm more of like Bob Wool, who's like suspicious or at least dismissive of her career as a photojournalist, more than assuming that she works for some fashion magazines and less for the pictures of the dead people in Corto Maltese. But Kim Basinger has, I would say, I'm being charitable, a different kind of charisma because she was a model and a dancer who transitioned into acting, and it's hard for me to watch Batman '89 and think, well, she was the best. Really, I mean, I knew that they had another Vicki Vale in mind. I forget who was going to be.
I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer at one point, but Michael Keaton put the kibosh on it because they had just broken up.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, that'll definitely do it for you.
Well, he blackballed her notoriously.
Interesting. I guess that didn't last very long, but yeah, I mean, but what Pfeiffer does in Batman Returns is just insane. I mean, Pfeiffer, I've become such a huge fan of Pfeiffer, watching all that work from that stretch of, I don't know, 85 to like 95.
No, even earlier, good Scarface through Batman Returns is it's a good 10-year stretch.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see her two best films at that period were Baker Boys and Batman Returns, just the kind of aplomb and confidence she has where, Jesus, there's just one scene in Batman Returns where when she comes back to the apartment after being pushed out the window and she picks up the milk and she sort of staggers around. She dumps the milk on the floor of the cat bowl, takes a splash of it herself. And the way she holds her body, there's such a tension in her trunk. It's watching how an actor knows how to move every single muscle group of their body. She's so confident and so physical. And it's amazing that it's like, well, where the hell did she go past middle age? I know that she kind of
and she learned how to use the goddamn whip. I mean, there's behind the scenes footage where she is actually whipping the heads off the mannequins, and she's very convincing.
But like the thing is, yes. So Batman fucks and Batman bones down with her, and there's such a great sexual tension. You see that Bruce Wayne has an active sex life and an active libido, and she activates it. And the two of them vibing on each other, whether it's in the office, Max Schreck's office, or if it's on the rooftop. And, there's such a great sex appeal where, I thought for the longest time, what Burton really wanted to do was show the freaks. He wanted to show the circus. I don't know what that's all about, but it's like, ironically, the most successful parts, it seems like he understood the character of Catwoman better than any other character.
Yeah, and also let these characters be adults. A lot of modern day superheroes, you see them falling in love, but you don't see a lot of like sex appeal. Like Gamora and Star-Lord, at one point they're in love, but it's not like you have a lot of scenes of them like drunkenly walking up the stairs and like, about to get it on. And I think a little sex appeal goes a long way. Although I should say Batman Returns in terms of box office underperformed relative to the first, because there were a lot of people at the time who complained about the movie being marketed to kids, because I can remember summer 92 when McDonald's was putting like bat discs and all the Happy Meals and all this crap. Like they were doing the full court press, but like are 6-year-old kids into leather and whips? I don't know. Maybe some are, but I know it kind of backfired a little bit from a Warner Brothers point of view. So I get why they're reticent or hesitant to go into anything involving sex for their superheroes. But for me, as a 46-year-old, I miss it. I want it back.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so 92, I was 17 years old. I mean, I understood, maybe I wouldn't have got the whole thing about, actually how close the dance was to the two of them getting laid, as opposed to just the idea of sexiness involving with their thing. It looks like they are pretty close to boning down at some point, especially when she comments on what did she say, semi-hard feelings?
Right. We're going to do a little experiment, y'all. So everybody in the live stream, I figured out how to do this functionality. I'm not good with computers, but I figured out how to add clips to live streams in advance. And I don't know if I play a clip, if it's just going to shut down the live stream or get flagged or whatever. It's a brand new territory. If for whatever reason I get thrown out or the live stream gets shut down, I will start up a fresh one very quickly. But here is the clip that Mr. Scurry is talking about, or I would play the clip if I could figure out how to. Oh, here it is. All right, so here's the bit with Selena Kyle and Bruce Wayne having a little moment together.
No hard feelings.
Actually, semi-hard, I'd say.
Va fucking boom. So yeah, are we still online? I think we're still online. So
I think
anyway,
we're still going. Yeah.
first experiment was a success, but yeah, that's just a classic example of Michelle Pfeiffer talking about how Batman is semi-hard. That is something absent from today's filmmaking landscape. I guess you would see a touch of it in movies like The Suicide Squad by James Gunn, when Harley Quinn's like, "You are so freaking hot," and jumps on this like, crime lord or politician or whatever, and they start having a giant sex scene. But it's very rare, and I guess James Gunn understands this. I think most filmmakers, especially people at Marvel, do not.
Yeah. And here's my question back to you: is that do you think that the success, this sort of sexual chemistry success that we see with Batman Returns, is there a possibility that it could have been as good with the other two actors who were in the mix for Catwoman? Now, everyone, Martin said this in the chat just before. Everyone famously knows that Sean Young was in the mix, and then I think she broke her hip or something on a horse, and she had to drop out. But the person who was in the running, who was actually cast and hired, was Annette Bening. And Annette Bening got pregnant.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so it was just too. I think it was a combination of the stunts and the corset and all these things. It would have been too physical, even with the stunt double. So she also had to drop out. God knows how Annette Bening must feel about that. But do you think that either of those two actresses, you would have had a different set of sexual chemistries, but potent nonetheless?
I like Annette Bening quite a bit in movies like The Grifters and Bugsy, but for me, she's never held a candle to Michelle. I think Michelle Pfeiffer is one of the great beauties of that era, and kind of incomparable in many ways. And Sean Young, I mean, I fucking love her in Blade Runner, and I loved her in No Way Out. I mean, obviously, she could easily handle the sex appeal.
Yeah.
She could do it standing on her head, no problem. So who knows what might have been, but I'm glad we got Michelle Pfeiffer because she was born to play this part. I mean, she says things like, "Be gentle, it's my first time." It's like a mugger's coming up to her. It's like, all right, we're in a new landscape here, and I like it.
When Annette Bening is in the bed, naked, looking at Cusack and Grifters, and she says, "What do you want? The loot?" No, it was the landlord. She says, "What do you want? The loot or the
money
lady?"
or the lady?" Yeah,
yeah, and it's like, God damn, like that was her first. I mean, she'd been in films before that, but her first big step out was a nude scene. As it was in the '80s, you could make a lot of traction by having a well placed nude scene. Actresses were expected to take their top off. And that was just part of the business. But you can also begin an estimable career that way, because she was on a rocket ride after that. But I mean, that proves that I think she would have been the physical match inside the Catwoman costume as Michelle Pfeiffer. I don't think that the appeal would have been quite the same. And it's like, there's no point in really trying to, there's no point even trying to talk about this, because Michelle Pfeiffer's perfect. I don't want to recast her. I like her exactly the way it is. And it's a great crying shame that Halle Berry got to do the Catwoman movie and not Michelle Pfeiffer. On the other hand, I thought about the feeling I had when Batman Returns was over. I'm like, God damn, I want so much more of her than what we got. But it's like, that's a great feeling to leave a movie with, is to be underserved and sort of like over hungry for more. That's a good relationship with a film.
You never know. If The Flash does really well, maybe we'll get an Elseworlds movie that reunites Michael Keaton and Michelle Pfeiffer for one more turn around the track. So let's get into, once again, the goal of this live stream is not to give away any spoilers whatsoever, but we are going to be talking about The Flash, and there are spoilers all over the internet. I'm not going to deliberately talk about them or any of the announcements, but if people want to ask questions, I'm not going to turn down your questions. But a question from Martin Kessler about The Flash. I'd love to hear your thoughts on if Keaton's Batman will still work as well when removed from that stylized Tim Burton world. Obviously, when it comes to production design, to music, style, mood, aesthetic, etc., Tim Burton's world is very special. It's unique. From what I've heard, and this is not a spoiler, but from what I've heard, the second half of The Flash comes to life, and that we see a version of Batman that every fan of Michael Keaton, like, it's their wildest wet dream of him just kicking ass and being a complete and total fucking badass. My suspicion, or my answer to Martin's question, is that he's going to work just fine, but it'll be a different version. It'll be obviously Andy Muschietti. Is that how I pronounce his last name? Muschietti? I don't know. He's a very different aesthetic, very different style, but I think it's going to work just fine, if not more so, because I don't think Tim Burton's very good at like fight scenes. Like when you watch Batman and Batman Returns, not a lot of great action, a lot of great scenes, a lot of great moments, a lot of great atmosphere, not a lot of great combat. I think we're going to finally see Michael Keaton beating the fucking shit out of people. But you tell me, how do you think it's going to work outside of Tim Burton's world?
Well, other than that, you're going to be watching a 71 or 72-year-old man, or what is purportedly a 72-year-old character kicking ass is going to be strange. I feel like you've already seen this a little bit in the trailer, the two trailers for Flash, is that when they switch over to like a digital stuntman, You get a little bit of that Matrix Revolutions problem of a fake character, and you're going to be watching, if at least it's not an actor, a stuntman in a costume, it's going to be a CGI stuntman doing these things. And it's to see,
and same for Supergirl, same for Flash, same for all of them. Yeah,
I know, but it's like to watch a walking Michael Keaton, and then it's going to change in the frame to the digital guy. He's going to turn into a piece of rubber and zip around the screen like Ben Affleck did, essentially grappling from one place to another, and then it becomes Ben Affleck again. When he hits the ground. That stuff always loses me a little bit. Like you said about Batman not having great action scenes, it's true. I think there was the knife guy who attacked him with swords, and he does a little bit of sort of blocking with the wrist and ankles. Yeah. Mostly he's punching guys.
And the fight scene at the top of the church at the finale.
Yeah, so it's like what he does is walk and lurch and spin. Of course, he couldn't turn his neck, but what that does is sets up those great, full body spins, very Hammer horror.
And I think it's
things.
The best looking version of the mask we've ever seen. Even if he can't turn his head, when he's in profile, like holding Joker up, it looks great. Like with every subsequent version, I'm always like, why do the ears look so weird? How come the head looks so weird? For whatever reason, in profile, Michael Keaton's Batman cowl, perfect.
Well, that's because it looks like Neil Adams. I mean, Neil Adams had the best of both worlds in that he had it was that full, essentially it just went from points to shoulder at one straight line, which is what Keaton's costume looks like. But the thing is, in the comic books, you can pretend that Neil Adams' Batman can turn his head and has full articulation. When you start to put him inside the actual helmet with seams and joints, then you wind up getting a battle suit that looks, I mean, I don't mind the look so much, but I certainly appreciate that Jim Aparo, Neil Adams look where it's just essentially a series of long triangles. It makes for the best silhouette of Batman you can find. And yeah, it's all straight angles, and it looks incredible the way that Burton and his DP would light those scenes. It was insane.
All right, well, a little box office prediction for The Flash, because we're seeing some soft data on how well it's going to open, but who knows, it might have legs. So box office prediction time in terms of how well this movie will be received, because I imagine the review that we're going to see a lot is first half of the movie, which is the Ezra Miller show, is a little tedious because he's tedious to begin with, and now you have double Ezra Miller. It's like, I'd rather just walk in an hour late. But I think everybody's going to more or less concur that the last hour is like the most fun you can have at the movies all summer. So in terms of competition, we've got Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, we got Fast X, Little Mermaid, Across the Spider-Verse, Transformers, Indiana Jones, Mission Impossible, Barbie, and more. My prediction is that it's going to come in number 2 behind Mission Impossible, because all these movies are going to eat each other's box office alive. Prediction time, and we're going to have just a bit of pride, a bet between gentlemen. Where do you think it'll place for movies starting with Guardians up through like Meg 2?
Meg 2. Well, I think I agree with you on this one.
Meg 1 made 500 million. People are sleeping on Meg. So.
It also had a big Chinese launch too. It got some of that China money in there as well. I agree with guys like Bellany from Puck, the Town podcast, where he's been cracking this stuff down for weeks now, talking about what the stretch is going to be in the summer. And I mean, I think you've even alluded to this, is that Mission Impossible, I think, is kind of going to be a spiritual sequel to Top Gun Maverick. The last one crossed over $1 billion, I think, or got very close to $1 billion. No, it got close to $1 billion.
It was north of 800, but it was the best one yet.
And then Top Gun got $1 billion, but I think that this is going to be the momentum for Top Gun's still there, and so I think that Cruise is going to get $1 billion. He's going to cash out on that one pretty well. Whether The Flash comes in second place, I don't know. I mean, I think The Flash. I think this is going to get 500 million. I think it's going to do very good for itself. But I think it's got a lot of adversity to overcome. And I'll say, what the wild card is, we're not going to talk about spoilers, but there's some big ass shit at the back end of this thing. It was spoiled this week. We're not going to talk about it.
But a ton of cameos toward the very end.
Exactly. And it's like when word of mouth starts spreading, you're going to get a lot of curiosity. There's going to be a lot of shaky, camera phone pictures of who's on the screen and things like that. I think it's going to spur a lot of, it's big sort of like pan-cultural topics. I mean, it's not just like, they got Danny DeVito to show up. It's bigger than that. It's way bigger than that. I think the curiosity is good. The thing is, you're going to see the whole movie just for the cameos at the end.
I feel like for me, that stuff is all niche. Like the diehard nerds who spend a lot of time on Twitter talking about movies, they care about all those cameos. Yeah. It's the casuals that you need to get their butts in the seat. And I think there are a lot of casuals who love Michael Keaton. And I think there are a lot of casuals who would just go see any superhero movie. But who knows? Maybe it'll fall on its face. If Ezra is just shrill and annoying for the first hour of the movie, people might fucking walk out. I mean, who knows? So for me, that is the big X factor. Can Ezra be a leading man? Because I think Barry Allen was horribly miscast by Zack Snyder. He had a lot of great qualities with his vision, but I feel like when I think of Barry Allen, I think of the Barry Allen of the 60s, square-jawed, crew cut, working for the police, you know, kind of a straight arrow in a lot of ways. And Hal Jordan was always the wild man. So you had the straight arrow and the wild man who were like the buddy team. Casting Ezra Miller, he should have been Wally West. Like he should have been anybody, not Barry Allen. And so I just feel like, yeah, he's not the guy to carry this franchise.
Yeah, it's that thing where he sounds like he could be in the cast of Euphoria or something. The character I'm saying, I think that Ezra Miller is a they. I don't want to get in trouble for this whole thing, but anyway,
call him Ezra, and you can do no wrong.
That's true. Call him Ezra. Call Ezra. Ezra he has that energy where he comes across with that garrulous, chatty energy, this sort of very glib postmodern thing, and I mean. I know that's why he needed a little bit of young. Everyone else in that series was so old, and that's why Snyder wanted to put somebody else who had kind of. I mean,
Gal Gadot
energy.
Was like 30 when she was cast. I mean, she wasn't like some old lady.
Gal Gadot's giving across this sort of timeless, dignified, statuary energy, where you needed a kid, you needed somebody who was the audience surrogate, and the Flash was supposed to be the audience surrogate. I mean, I get that, but at the same time, I agree in that. Ezra Miller would have made a better Wally West, and if you had somebody who was a little more square, ironically, like a Chris Pine or somebody would have been fucking perfect for the role, but they just didn't go that direction.
Yeah, Chris Pine would have been pitch perfect casting. Well, we've gone to 30 minutes. I'm going to open things up for questions from anybody. So what I'm just going to do, I'm going to start the chat and just slowly go down, and any questions that jump out at me, I'm just going to have us dive right in. But as I scan, let me leave you with a question before I start doing my scanning. So we have a question from Twitter from yesterday from Jack Martin, aka @JMartin578. It's a question in two parts. The previous DC regime were actually going to make Keaton the main Batman of the DCEU and a Nick Fury type character. Would you have preferred that, or happy with what James Gunn is doing, rebooting Batman yet again for the DCU? Second part, Gunn will definitely see all the positive fan reaction for Keaton's return. Could do a Batman Beyond movie with Keaton under the Elseworlds banner. Bring Michelle Pfeiffer back as well. Easy money at the box office. So while you tackle that, I'll go digging for some comments.
I think that James Gunn is under a lot of pressure to do something that he took on a hard job. Let's put it that way. He's not merely the Kevin Feige, because I think he said that he's splitting the work with I can't remember who the executive is. Somebody's making the decision on the executive side. He's mostly staying on the creative side, and so he doesn't have to worry about writing the entire ship. He's been given a lot of deputy power to pretty much reconceive the idea, which is why. If you watch that video, we're getting things like Creature Commandos, a lot of Swamp Thing by Mangold, if that's going to happen. So a lot of strange choices. But I think that the centerpiece is going to be Legacy. That's the one he's putting all his effort into. He's going to direct that himself, and they're casting Superman. God knows what that's going to be. No, I don't think that. I have a feeling that if we may get two Batman, if you still have Pattinson doing his, Matt Reeves storyline. But I think that what they're going to try to do is make the DCEU Superman centric, and they're going to try to kind of make up for Henry Cavill and all the work that he didn't/couldn't do under Zack Snyder, because he wasn't the center of the universe. I mean, as much as I think Superman should be the center, the heart of the DC universe, Zack Snyder just did not see the same fate for Superman in there. So I don't think we're going to see Michael Keaton come back. I mean, Michael Keaton's ranching. He's fine. He's doing character actor bits. They're not going to see him again. Nor do I think you need to, because if the DC universe, if any of the shit matters, and if you care about it, there's so much there already without having to pull a character like this out of the mothballs. I think that by the time this is all finished, we should be happy we got this Keaton. Hopefully he is happy with the work he did. This movie's been on the shelf for a long fucking time. We haven't talked about the fact that this thing was completed in 2021.
Yeah, it's
a fucking
expensive
mess.
Reshoots, replanning. I mean, the budget is
Good
colossal.
God.
I don't know what the real budget is, but if you include all the reshoots, I imagine that the budget is in the stratosphere, and Hollywood needs to get over this whole era of making $300 million movies. And I know COVID introduced a lot of additional costs due to all the protocols and whatnot. But when I hear about like Fast X costing 340 or Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny costing 300, this is madness. Because you know what the number one complaint is about all these movies? I hated the CGI. It looked like shit. Well, that's one of the main costs. Well, why are they insisting upon all this expensive CGI, which nobody ever says, oh my God, the CGI was fucking amazing. When was the last time you heard that? A decade ago? I don't know. But like, bring these movies back down to 100 or 150, get actual sets with actual stunt people. Like John Wick Chapter 4, $100 million movie. Bring things back down. I think if you did a Batman movie with the scale and scope and production value of John Wick Chapter 4, people could totally live with that.
You know, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think that a lot of these costs that you're seeing are above the line. As much as they've destroyed the concept of the actor and the movie star, it doesn't matter anymore other than Tom Cruise. There's no more leading people. I think a lot of the fact that, like, for instance, the Fast and Furious movies is because, you know, all the way on down from Tyrese to freaking Ludacris, it's above the line salaries that go up with each movie, and so they're asking for more and more money when they come in there.
Yeah, you price this is why shows and movies eventually just price themselves out, even if people want to see them continue.
And so the CG, you know, there's the expression "fix it in post," you know, which is what they're doing. They're essentially making half their movie in post. However, the costs for that are still way lower than they should be. They are depressing the market artificially. So I think the cost is still manpower front. It's all above the line. When I say above the line, that's actors, face actors on screen with lines. When you have to sign up all these people, that's what they're getting. So this movie right now, from what I saw, whether this is accurate or not, they say a $200 million budget. I say bullshit. It was $200 million, I'm sure, when you turn the key, when it was done shooting principal photography. But I think that it probably added at least another $75 to $100 million between then and now on all the fixes. And I mean, there's stuff that they shot for this movie that they didn't include. There was all this other, you know, stuff that it's in the can. They actually had it finished.
A million years ago, it was going to be not Flashpoint, but something resembling Flashpoint that would kind of reset the DC universe moving forward. And it was going to kind of lay down the foundation for the big strategic pivot in a new direction. And all that, well, they did end up doing a new direction. They hired James Gunn, and so it'll be interesting to see, because without saying what the final shot is before the post-credit stingers, that was originally supposed to send the DC universe in a different direction. It'll be interesting to see what the new version of the movie is on the early access screening starting on the 12th, because I know, like at CinemaCon and some of these other early screenings, they have not included any of the post-credit stingers. So who knows? Maybe there'll be something really special. Getting back to Michael Keaton, I'm just going down the chat and I see a question from Martin Kessler. He says, I prefer Batman Returns over 89, but it's first and foremost a Tim Burton movie and a Batman movie a distant second. I could not agree. Well, I agree with his assessment of how it's a Tim Burton movie. I think he still had a lot of Edward Scissorhands flowing through his bloodstream when he made that. And everything with the Penguin is very reminiscent of Edward Scissorhands. And he kind of, anyway, you can tell Batman 89 is first and foremost just a kick-ass Batman movie. So agree or disagree, did Tim Burton's personality kind of overwhelm Batman Returns? And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, I'm of two minds about it, because, you know, Batman 89 is more in line with Pee-wee's Big Adventure than Edward Scissorhands, I would say. And that it's a hyperbolic movie. It's got that great Anton First design, which Bo Welch then kind of like pushed one step further when they did Batman Returns in that same vein. But I think that there's not quite as much loud Tim Burton gas pedal pushing in Batman 89 as there is in Returns. And I think that by that point, Tim Burton was emboldened. He was probably asked to do more. They said, okay, what do you want to do? Then you get circus freaks, you got tumblers, you got penguins, you got all this bullshit.
Sword swallowers going into combat with the sword and their belly. I'm like, this is fucking idiotic. When Batman pulls that sword out, and like, once again, you're getting into clown circus mode as opposed to Gotham City, The Dark Knight.
Yeah, well, it's like you could picture at the very opening scene of Batman, those two tramps on the roof look very much like dispossessed, grotty guys who would pull a knife and stick it in your gut to steal your pearls. You know, and even in the scene when they're walking past they get out of Zorro in the flashback in Batman 89, all that stuff has a real down-to-earth grottiness to it. Where
it's something else in Batman 89. I noticed it's not Footlight Parade, but something like that. But they actually did not put Zorro in.
No.
Yeah, they didn't go full canon for that scene.
They didn't get the rights for it. But the idea is that like all that stuff looks like it takes place. It could have been in some fusion of Fritz Lang and like Tommy Udo, you know, like that is, you know, that has almost a very sort of film noir type thing to it, as opposed to the full tilt German expressionism stuff that, and like ridiculous clown college shit that he was doing in Batman Returns. Again, it doesn't ruin Batman Returns, but other than the Joker's guys wearing Harlequin makeup in one scene and maybe doing that parade. The parade in '89 still has this sort of like, it looks like these guys are not quite taking it seriously. They're just putting on a parade to poison the whole city. They're not like actual fucking circus members and carnies.
Yeah. And they don't have penguins armed with weapons walking around, which is the dumbest shit I've ever fucking seen. Like when the penguins are lowering the body into the water and they're walking alongside them, I'm like, anyway, that's the stuff that breaks my brain when I'm watching Batman Returns, even if I'm completely in lust with the lovely Catwoman. That's
all Burton. I mean, I guarantee you the things you're pointing out are very much Burtonian elements. And these are much the same way. Like when Kevin Smith talks about, was it John Peters wanted a giant spider and he was fighting for getting that giant spider? Like, and it's going to get into some movie one way or the other. And I think Tim Burton's like, well, I want to do penguins with rockets strapped on their backs. And this is what I got to have to make me happy. That kind of thing.
All right. Well, I got a question here from Mr. Adam Murakoff. My question for the live stream is, if The Flash makes over $1 billion, that's the big curveball. But if it does, I'm guessing it'll be largely due to Michael Keaton's Batman. What are the odds that WB throws money at Keaton and possibly even Tim Burton to come back and make a third and final Batman '89 movie? Yeah, would you, just as a fan of somebody who, was reading Frank Miller in the 1980s and reading Alan Moore and watching all these movies in real time, like it was a very good time to be a Batman fan back in the 80s. Yeah. Jim Aparo, all these guys, we were just Jim Starlin writing the book. I mean, it was glorious. Robin getting killed off and Death in the Family. There's just, it seemed like every month there was a reason to get excited about Batman. Would you feel that little tingle? Would you get the itch if Tim Burton and or Michael Keaton wanted to come back for one last turn around the track? I don't want Tim Burton coming anywhere near this franchise because the last 20 years have been a train wreck for Tim Burton, but I would love to see Michael Keaton keep putting on the mask.
If Tim Burton somehow, well, all right, this is a lot of provisos. Adam is like opening up a number of traps here. It's like, first of all, it has to cross over $1 billion. And then you have to sort of attribute that to Michael Keaton. If that happened, then yeah, I do say that they would say, oh, you know what? We need to take a flyer on this. This wasn't Creature Commandos or something we hadn't planned, but I think that we can make an allotment in the budget to catch lightning in a bottle to do another Batman movie the way people want to see it. If that happened, it would be too compelling not to be. I wasn't going to see The Flash. I honestly did not give a fuck until I saw Keaton show up in the trailer. I scratched my head and I watched it like 2 or 3 times. I'm like, he's in here, huh? And he's committed to it. He's saying that he knows how to do this and he's still into Batman. Well, God damn it, I guess I am too. If we're going to trust Keaton, and Keaton has been hitting out of the park too. Keaton's been doing nothing but solid work recently. I mean, that's another thing that's worth pointing out.
Basically since Birdman.
Yeah, he was great in Spotlight. He was great, Christ, and the Other Guys, that stupid cop movie with Will Ferrell. He's been doing Dope Sick. He did The Founder. He was in the Chicago 8, Chicago 7, 6, whatever that movie was.
And he's in a Martin Campbell action movie, the name of which escapes him right now. But anyway, yeah, he's been working.
Yeah. And so it's like, I really appreciate what he's got as a 70-year-old man. He's got a completely different set of tools now, and his gravity is way different. So, I mean, I think it's ridiculous to watch him put on a Batman costume. On the other hand, it's like, well, why the fuck not? I mean, that kind of is the whole essence of Dark Knight Returns, is watching this old man who clearly has like arthritic knees and, a liver problem, and he's like somehow able to fight people.
I guess the question is, can he still get nuts? Speaking of which, let me experiment with one more clip, because everybody loves that bit from the trailer when he says, let's get nuts, in a very calm way. But here is the original moment we all know and love.
And he had us.
Now you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
Tell me something, my friend. You ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight?
I guess my question is, does he have anybody in the cast who can get nuts with him? Michael Shannon, obviously, he's a maniac, but I don't know if Ezra Miller is the dance partner that Michael Keaton needs to bring out his best. But when you got Jack Nicholson doing just that whole deranged shtick across from you, it's very easy to reach for new heights.
Yeah, Keaton has talked about how he started off really anxious about matching Jack's energy, and Jack was coming off of, I think the movie he did before this one,
Witches of Eastwick and stuff like that.
Witches of Eastwick. Yeah, in fact, I think Peters produced Witches of Eastwick, and that was very much the paycheck job he got beforehand, and he did that for George Miller, and so he was already kind of doing these big hammy roles by that point. And, Keaton himself was still just messing around in dramatic roles, having had done Clean and Sober and a few of these other movies. So, the dance partner is that I think like a lot of actors figure out, with Nicholson, you essentially let him do the work of guiding the scene. He's going to be very charitable to you. I remember some of these interviews I heard with Alexander Payne when they were shooting
About Schmidt.
About Schmidt. Yeah, like he was guiding a young director through it. He says, "Kid, whatever you come up with for me to do," he goes, "I'll justify it in my head. I will do all the work of making these scenes work. You just worry about doing direction. I'll make the rest of it flat out work." And that's what Nicholson does for you. And especially Nicholson was sitting in the makeup chair doing this entire thing all the time into the application. And then he comes up with this big thing. Essentially, he made Batman a lot less obstreperous and, loud inside this role because he's doing such a noisy job over here. But no, I said, who's the dance partner in this movie? He hasn't got one. I mean, it's kids and it's a 70-year-old man. And I don't think Michael Shannon's going to be look, maybe I'm wrong. I don't think Shannon is going to be as big a piece of this movie as you think, because he doesn't show up until, well, I mean, they're zipping it out of time. So I think he's in the background. I mean, it's going to be some scenes with him. I don't think Shannon's going to get a chance to do the full Shannon in this one, to be honest.
Yeah, that could be a flaw. All right. Well, getting back to the questions from the chat, we have a question from the Vinyl Q's, our friend over on Twitter. But hang on, it moved on me. Well, I remember what she said. And I'm paraphrasing, but here it is. Settle it once and for all. In a short answer, is Batman Returns a Christmas movie?
Of course, it's a Christmas movie. Actually, and I'll tell you why. And
is it a Christmas movie or is it a movie set during Christmas? Because for me, there is a difference between the two.
I would give it a Christmas movie. I mean,
I hate Christmas movies, but I love movies set during Christmas, especially when a movie addresses the Christmas blues, which this movie does. When Michael Keaton has that great scene with Michelle Pfeiffer, he's like, "You got kind of a dark side, don't you?" I mean, it makes me fucking scream with laughter every time, but she is feeling the Christmas blues, and I always get the Christmas blues. I fucking hate Christmas.
The best, the head turn neck whip that I did. This was when the first time they're on the roof. She says something about, a kiss could be, a kiss can be deadly if you mean it. And then when they replay that scene at the dance and they switch the lines around, and there's this look of realization that's electric in both.
Do we have to start fighting? Yeah.
Yes, but she has this. Like, she's like, "Oh fuck, I love this. I don't want to ruin this." It's like, I don't want to lose this. Do we have to stop fighting? She's like, are we have to continue doing the whipping and the kicking? Because she goes, I don't want to fuck this whole thing up. And so it's like, you know what? Because the mistletoe is used that's a Daniel Waters script thing. We haven't even described how great Daniel Waters script was for the most part, but that's a Daniel Waters script thing, and that works beautifully. And because it employs a specific bit about Christmas, I will say that adds element of Christmas to it.
Yeah, well, just to plug my own channel, I did a video back in December of the top 10 movies for people, movies about Christmas for people who hate Christmas. And some of the comments were like, "What? How could you ever not like Christmas?" I'm like, because it fucking sucks. It's nothing but hangovers and stress and fights and having to spend money that you don't want to spend. I mean, it's a giant pain in the ass. It's fun when you're 7 and you're like, "Yay, Santa came," and all that kind of crap. But otherwise, yeah, I think Christmas fucking blows. So I love Batman Returns as a movie set during Christmas. But here's a comment from Mr. Moose Matson, which will lead to one of my questions. Moose writes, 2 of my favorite people talking about one of my favorite movies. It doesn't get better, which leads me to your partner in crime from Hitting the Brakes with Moose and Bill. He's a bit of a Batman fanatic. And yesterday, the day before, he posted some pictures of him in his rubber mask from 1989 and in the present day. So if you were to guess, how many hours a day does Moose spend still wearing that mask? And if you were to come up with 1 or 2 adjectives to describe the smell contained within, what would those words be?
The smell of the mask I would describe probably alternatingly as somewhere between cheddar, perhaps, and maybe hair. But how much time a day does he spend in the mask? I could certainly picture him sitting in his large chair, waiting for the bat to smash through the window, pondering how he was going to take on the criminal lot. Except I think that Moose would actually be wearing the mask while in the chair, waiting for the bat to come through the window, just essentially with his chin in his hand, perhaps a tea or some sort of goblet as he's reading a book, something like that. But I would say he probably spends from like 9:30 to 11 every night inside the mask. Yeah,
if people have seen the old serials of Batman from the 40s, the very first episodes, I mean, Batman drives like a regular car and lives in a regular house. It's like your neighbor in the suburbs. But the first scene is of him just sitting at his desk in the costume, and he doesn't seem like the Caped Crusader or a masked vigilante. he just seems fucking crazy. It's like, is this guy just sitting in his house all day in the outfit, like waiting to go into action? And I feel like that is Moose hanging out at his home in Michigan, just in costume, ready to go, hanging out in this library, just like waiting for the signal. One day we'll have to rent a little skylight and make that signal appear.
Or what we'll have to do is get like a drone photographer to like actually take some video in through the window without him knowing, just to see what's going on for ourselves.
Well, here's an interesting comment from, I apologize if I butchered the pronunciation, but from Mahmoud Hajafar. Good evening, Baghdad time. So somebody in Baghdad tuning in. So shout out from New York time. We also got the Boys in the Lab, really cool Irish artist who does great movie posters online. Everybody should hunt him down on Twitter. He writes a Burton version with Keaton, with Mr. Freeze and Scarecrow. I mean, if Burton could set his ego aside and do almost like hire Bruce Timm as a consultant and get that early 90s vibe going, sign my ass up. I just don't know if at this point, as like an elder statesman of cinema, if he's even capable of setting his ego aside. And also, he's got Beetlejuice 2 coming up, and all the success with Wednesday on Netflix. He is doing just fine. So his dance card is full. Mr. Joshua Gray writes, let's get nuts. Yes, indeed. Let's get nuts. And yeah, nobody's got a bigger pair of nuts than Michael Keaton. Any other, so actually, before I just want to check my questions before we wrap up that side as I scan. Boom, 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 boom. All right, I think I'm done with my official questions. So I'm just going to go with questions in the chat. But do you have any questions, comment, statement? I feel like I've been kind of dominating the airwaves at this point, kind of dictating where we go. We got 9 minutes left. Is there any aspect of Michael Keaton, Tim Burton, their style, their approach, or just killer scenes that we have been ignoring or neglecting?
Well, we've certainly hit upon the high notes, in terms of how, they were inventing a Batman, a superhero type that hadn't been on the screen before, how this movie was reinventing the blockbuster. We covered that at the very beginning. But it's, I don't like to get old manny about this shit and how we have it better or how it was better, merely to say that we were passengers through history and that we lived through the release of Star Wars, which kind of like shook the earth down to the mantle. It exposed the core and the crust of the earth. And then we went through 1989's Batman, which summarily changed the form of blockbuster filmmaking thereafter, created a complete new vocabulary that it didn't stop. Even though the superhero stuff kind of went more, but you don't get a lot of the movies of the 90s unless you have the Batman success. And then
you don't get Darkman without Batman.
No, but I don't think you don't get De Palma's Mission Impossible 1996 unless you have Batman. I mean, I think there's a certain type. Granted, there's a lot of tank girls and phantoms and things like that along the way, and those things that those movies. Mystery Men, those movies sort of have their fans, they have their defenders. It's sort of a little moment, but not until you get Blade in 1998. I think
Blade's the turning point.
And then Raimi doing Spider-Man in 2002 was a big deal. That's the official start of the Marvellennium. But talking about all of these things, the reason why I mention all this lay of history is because you were waiting for Batman to come out. Tim Burton is a movie. He's only done 3 films at that point. He did Frankenweenie. He did Edward Scissorhands. He did Beetlejuice. He did Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Pee-wee's,
yeah, 4 or 5 movies, untested, and extremely nervous. The guy was a freaking Disney animator, a little nerdy kid from Burbank who gothy shit and rooms with shut-in shades and a lot of really depressing looking animation and pencil drawings and stuff like that. And his big thing beforehand was that he was fired, I think, or at least he was on that, was it The Black Cauldron, Sword in the Stone? One of the Disney movies that was actually one of the bigger disappointments or outright failures of Disney animated. He was kind of one of the chief animators of that. So his whole feature film career as a live action director was trying to make up for the fact that he never got a chance to do the Disney work. He kind of was cast out of the Magic Kingdom and it didn't really work. So this moment of him with a lack of confidence and drive and trying to prove himself. And, then again, Nicholson thinking, well, what the hell's going to happen to my career? Will I be able to work with James L. Brooks again if this doesn't work? Am I going to be a laughing stock? Michael Keaton, getting all these fucking letters. They said apparently there were 50,000 letters sent to the Wall Street Journal and all these different outlets saying that Michael Keaton was not worth being cast. One of them was Bo Smith, who ended up being one of
It's
the
just
top
the more
Ball's
things
guys.
changed, the more things stayed the same.
Yeah,
So
and the
it
other
was
part
just
of this,
slower back in the day.
and I'll shut the fuck up about this in a minute, but apparently what you hear Burton talks about when they were talking about the fan uproar about this back in the day. Burton said, we can't listen to them. They're wrong. They essentially don't matter to us. And that's amazing in 1989 dollars, because you couldn't get away with something like that today, because essentially the studios have made the fan base co-producers. If they don't like something, they're going to let you know, and you kind of have to alter it before you get to the production stage, or else you're going to pay for it.
Higher special effects because of fan outrage. So
Yeah.
you have a complete reverse scenario now. I guess there are probably still some filmmakers who would say, y'all are wrong, wait and see. But it's increasingly difficult when everybody's got YouTube channels and podcasts and blogs and that sort of thing. But anyway, I'm glad Tim Burton won, because he was right and the fans were wrong.
Yeah, and the horrible thing is what this did to his career thereafter is because you wind up getting this farcical Tim Burton, who's just essentially wants to do carnival movies for the rest of his life, Sweeney Todd's, ridiculous things. That
I do
don't
like
have any
Ed Wood quite a bit.
Well, Ed Wood's good. I like Big Fish is good, but the rest of it.
Oh, no, I walked out of Big Fish. Yeah, I saw it hung over as hell on New Year's Day, and my brother looked over at one point, like 20 minutes in, and goes, dude, this kind of sucks. Can we get the fuck out of here? I was like, yes, please. And so we got up and left. I think Big Fish is no bueno. But a few comments from the chat. We got Mr. Adrian Mendoza, who says Keaton should have won that Oscar for Birdman. I 100% agree. Victor Rodriguez says, I hope they don't fall into a trap like Rise of Skywalker, where the main protagonist's journey is obscured by a much-loved character from the Burton movies. Honestly, I have such a distaste for Ezra Miller's interpretation of Barry Allen. I would have no problem whatsoever with him being overshadowed. And I think the big problem is we're going to get too much Ezra Miller as opposed to him being overshadowed. So the moment he gets overshadowed, I think the whole movie is going to pivot into much stronger territory. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. But at least think of it this way. This is the last stand of Ezra Miller. We're not going to have to deal with this shit unless you wind up seeing his movies come after this.
Has he done any publicity?
No, I mean, this is, we haven't even begun talking about
I think that tells us everything. Warner Brothers hasn't set him up for a single interview that I'm aware of.
No, it's a fiasco. The person, the them of Ezra Miller was on this unholy rip for like 2 years with imprisonment and fucking choking people and throwing chairs. And it was like the gigantic psychotic episode rundown of 2 years. This movie, one of the reasons it's been embargoed for 2 years is because this person has just been a fucking psychopath and they had no idea how they were going to sell this movie. I mean, Jesus, they got Johnny Depp. They wiped him out of all movies for something way less than what Ezra Miller did. And that's like Warner Brothers decided to stand on this and sell the movie with this person in it. It's like, that's ballsy, way ballsier than, their Warner's was going to do with Fantastic Beasts.
All right. Interesting comment from Mr. Kessler. I'd be more psyched if they brought back Snipes for another R-rated Blade film. Hell yes. Than the PG-13 MCU version that seems to be struggling to come together. Yeah. I feel like Blade has had as many stumbling blocks as The Flash, not in terms of controversy, but it just seems like so many false starts, so many problems with the script, so on and so forth. But goddamn, yeah. If any character, there are a handful of characters out there that should only be in R-rated movies. Blade, Deadpool, like there's just Cable, like there's certain people from, especially in the 90s, where they had a lot of blades and a lot of guns and just a lot of violence. And I would include Wolverine in the mix as well. Like Wolverine should never be in a PG-13 movie ever. And that's why people fucking love Logan. But yeah, I don't think Marvel's got the courage even if they do an R-rated Deadpool 3, it'll be the softest goddamn R-rated movie that you've ever seen. But I would love to be wrong. I mean, if anytime I'm always pessimistic about the future of Marvel these days, but I do think occasionally, by accident or by design, they will surprise us. So I don't think they're incapable of giving us a movie. I just think the odds are low.
Well, Mr. 2 Oscars, Mahershala Ali talked Kevin Feige into doing it. It wasn't Marvel's plan, but he signed on the line. He's going to be older by a considerable amount, more older than Snipes was when they did the first Blade movie. So Mahershala Ali he looks like he's cut out of like alabaster. The guy looks like an incredible physical specimen. He's in great shape, but he's already going to start this off. He's going to be like 54 years old by the time they start filming, if they start making Blade. And, Blades, I think, is on its third screenwriter at this point. Nick Pizzolatto from True Detective seasons 1 and 2. on 3 is the guy who's running the show now. But this is one of those things. People say that Blade is essentially an imaginary film. It's vaporware. Will it ever come to pass? I don't know. Good question.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's wrap things up with just a few predictions about the future of the DC universe. Obviously, James Gunn's got a modest hit on his hands. Guardians opened a little soft, but it's shown incredible legs. And he's got his Superman flick coming our way. But they've made a lot of announcements about animation, different films. Make some predictions. 5 years from now, are we going to see a fully robust, like healthy, thriving DC franchise where you've got all sorts of interesting directors with like a strong individual, unique vision coming in and playing in that sandbox? Are we seeing kind of a managed decline of superhero movies overall? Just as a fan, and like, what do you think? What do you want to happen, and what do you think will happen when it comes to DC characters over the next half decade?
Well, I think that James Gunn to me is better spent as a director and less as a creative executive. And we don't know exactly what he is like. What's his temperament behind closed doors? With him being a manager rather than a person who's actually going out there on set as a filmmaker, he is increasing every movie he gets out. He has more tools. He becomes a better director. It's hard to believe this is the same dude who was married to Jenna Fisher when he moved out to New York City and was doing Lloyd Kaufman trauma movies out in Queens.
And like Slither and Super and PG porn and all. I mean, the fact that he was doing PG porn, people don't know. It's everything you love about porn except for the sex, and they're fucking amazing. But that guy's in charge of like an empire. Warner Brothers is astonishing.
I think that the problem with if they bite off more than they can chew, or if their reach exceeds their grasp, it would be much better if they just sort of planned on things that would work rather than creating an entire slate. I know that the Warner Brothers and Zaslav and whoever else is in charge of this, they're conditioned to think that we need to introduce everybody to a continuity out. You need to know that this is going to pay off instantly rather than build it carefully one movie at a time and see where it goes. They're coming up with a plan, and it's a combination of cartoons and live action stuff on streaming and feature films. And the thing is, I am more hopeful for what his Superman's going to look like. I think it will be better than Zack Snyder's. I think it'll be way better than Singer's. I think it's going to harken back to Dick Donner's Superman, but I think it's going to be more James Gunn's thing. I have complete confidence he'll get Superman right. It's with the rest of the stuff that I sort of don't know. Like, do we want a Mangold Swamp Thing? Do we want another Harley Quinn movie? Do we want these other sort of offshoots that they're going to come up with that are,
I would say yes. If I think like Superman, that should be $200 to $300 million movie. Make it the biggest goddamn movie you've ever seen. But I think then you take the offshoot characters like Lobo, and you do $50 million movies. Like when Deadpool came out in 2015, I think $50 million movie made vast sums of cash, wildly profitable, even if it came in under a lot of its peers in terms of total box office. But I think the DC library, you have a couple thousand total badass characters like Booster Gold, which could be killer little franchises, but you don't need to make each and every single one of them a $200 million movie or a $300 million movie. Make them a little, HBO Max, aka Max show, or make them a $50 million movie. I think that's when you can experiment with some of the really strange backbend stuff. And Martin brought up an interesting point that the Authority is coming our way. And I've got the Authority right here. Hang on one sec. I actually still do have comics. For people who want to know what the fuck the Authority is, get these 2 trade paperbacks by Warren Ellis. Actually, this one's half Mark Miller, half Warren Ellis. But it's like the first 6 or 7 issues of Warren Ellis's run on the character. Imagine if the Justice League had balls, had nuts like Michael Keaton, and an R rating and total like lack of censorship, and just decided to order the world as they see fit. That is the Authority. And the art by Brian Hitch was just godlike. Some of the coolest, that actually got me back into comics in the late 90s when I was out of comics. Like everything with what the hell is it? Onslaught and Heroes Reborn and all the crap going on in Marvel. I ran screaming from the comic book industry, like never to return. But then Warren Ellis started doing stuff like Planetary. Hang on, I got more comics I'm pulling out for show and tell.
If you guys are no Planetary in the chat, sound off, because this is stuff that's essentially like founding artwork on planet Earth. And if you have not read Planetary, you owe it to yourself, and you owe it to me personally to go out and do it.
If James Gunn could make successful films out of Planetary and The Authority, I would forgive everything else. And I do love James Gunn's movies. I'm an unapologetic fan. I think The Suicide Squad might be my favorite superhero movie of the last 5 years. I saw it, I think, 3 or 4 times its opening weekend. I went fucking crazy for The Suicide Squad. If anybody can help shepherd Planetary and Authority and its undiluted, uncompromised, like pure vision form to the big screen, it would be him, because he's one of those guys. he'll know what makes it tick. He'll get it. It's not like he's going to be one of the execs in a room like, so what's the Authority? Like, why do people like it? It's just like another version of Superman. No, it's its own thing. And I think if you're smart, if you can get around all the kind of political hot potato stuff, you bring in Warren Ellis as a creative consultant and give him fucking credit. Give him his due. As opposed to constantly screwing the creators out of the proceeds of their own comics, bring in Warren Ellis and make him part of the process.
You know, the Authority, the problem is it's like, it is such, for a feature film, it's one thing. For a comic book, it was great because you don't have to sort of explain why this woman has a pint of mercury in her body that gives her ability to interface with machines. You don't have to explain how this one dude is, what's he called, a city savant. He's able to talk to cities. You could just put that in a comic book and it's fine. With a movie, you got a lot of heavy lifting to figure out how you're going to score those actual character beats. And then how do you explain the idea of the Authority, which, you know, like the thing is the Authority was from their point of view, but it wasn't exactly on their side. Ultimately, I think Warren Ellis was telling us a little bit that this is no way to run a superhero team, this sort of totalitarian tyrants. They were doomed to fail from the start, even though the stories were incredible and they had really thrilling adventures. It was sort of like an experiment that was waiting for failure that eventually came, which is why it only ran, I would say, what, 18 issues? I think.
Yeah, and they relaunched it a few times, but I was only preoccupied with the early days.
Yeah, here's a trivia question for you. Do you remember the actual event that kicked off Authority? Warren Ellis used it to get from Stormwatch to the Authority with one pivot book in the middle. A lot of people don't remember this.
Ooh, I've got some Stormwatch comics right here just to keep playing show and tell. Here's a little Stormwatch. I was Transmetropolitan, but anyway, so I've read the Stormwatch issues up to the point where it stops. I don't know if I saw the Catalyst that came between.
The Catalyst was Stormwatch versus Aliens. He actually used because he used the aliens to kill a bunch of people in Stormwatch. That set up the people in the Authority to come in and essentially change the group over because there was a giant transfer of power.
Yeah, you only had a few. I mean, obviously Apollo and Midnight are like the big superstars, but yeah, you only had a few people left. And then anyway, it was a weird thing where I wasn't really following like any of those comics in that continuity until Warren Ellis really dragged me in. And then that was basically the beginning of like a 16-year love affair with comics all over again, like late 70s to early 90s, massive comic reader. And then late 90s up through like the teens and the 2000s, massive comic reader. But I owe all that to Warren Ellis, and I've read more comics by him than I can count. And like that's what leads to me discovering Grant Morrison and getting into new X-Men and that sort of thing. Like suddenly, I was swimming in comics all over again, and I had the buying power where I could actually afford to spend like $100 a week on comics.
I hope that at some point, I know that inside the halls of comic books, which is essentially a pup tent somewhere out in the woods, because comic books don't even exist as a sort of cultural entity. However, I think that we will look back at the fossil record and see that as much as Warren Ellis and those guys and the British invasion had a lot to do with it, I hope that Jimmy Palmiotti and Joe Quesada get credit, because they had a lot to do with that turn of the millennium increase of excellence. You know, you get guys like what's his face coming over and doing Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man and stuff.
Brian Michael Bendis.
Brian Michael Bendis, you know, he brought in Grant Morrison, essentially borrowing him.
Yeah, he was doing Goldfish and Torso and Powers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Marvel changes because Marvel was coming out of bankruptcy. They had the ability to throw around the Max line, and there was a couple of these other lines that were really. I
love the Max line. The Luke Cage, Brian Azzarello was awesome, and the Garth Ennis Thor from the Max line. Both of those fucking ruled.
Yeah, I mean, Epic was a line of create our own comics, and that's what Mark Miller was doing stuff with Epic before he went over to Miller World, and so the thing is, it's like there's you know, if we do the forensics on what happened to comic books and why, you know, the things we love today have some staying power, it's because of Karen Berger at Vertigo keeping those talents in check, and then making sure that you know, Jimmy Palmiotti and Quesada was able to poach them from Marvel and get them on these big books and essentially change the playing field of X-Men. I think it was Adrian said that Onslaught got me at X-Men comics till Hickman. I would say that, you know, new X-Men.
But you're missing the Grant Morrison era, which only was like 36 issues. Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. I mean, I love Hickman. When he started doing Fantastic Four, I was like, whoa, this is a fresh new voice. And from Fantastic Four and FF onward, massive fan of Jonathan Hickman. But the Grant Morrison gave us a brief little vacation with X-Men, which lasted for a couple of years, which I adored.
It was solid stuff, and it was, you know, it was pretty much almost out of continuity. But the style and the texture of his comics were unlike anything else, and they weren't like that beforehand, and they sort of haven't picked up the texture afterwards.
All righty. Well, we have officially we've jumped the shark when it comes to our conversation about Michael Keaton. So where can people find you on social media? Where can people find your YouTube channel? Where can people find anything and everything related to Bill Scurry before we bring this sucker to a close?
I'm on all the socials, Instagram, Twitter, things of that nature, at William Scurry, or American Caesar Enterprises. Look for youtube.com/AM Caesar on YouTube for my video stuff. I have a podcast called I Don't Get It, which is I Don't Get It Podcast, or at Noah and Bill Show. That's on Twitter. Just look for me. I'm all over the place. I think everybody in the comments here already knows everything about me pretty much.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to doing more live streams in the future. Some topics that are out there that I'm thinking about doing, something related to Indiana Jones, I think would be in order. Something related to Mission Impossible might be in order. Maybe I can rope in Adam Rakoff to tackle Christopher Nolan and Oppenheimer, because Adam Rakoff works with Matthew Modine, who's in Oppenheimer. So Adam, if you're listening, hint. Let's make this happen. But I'm looking forward to doing a lot more live streams in the future. I just need to kick myself in the ass good and hard to make it happen. But we can't thank you enough for listening, watching, etc., and so forth. Remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell, all that good stuff. But as I always say, onwards and upwards. Booyakasha.